Today in the studio we have Kate Macpherson, who is the Secretary of the John Bradburne Memorial Society. Kate, welcome to Walsingham.
Thank you.
John Bradburne, who was he?
So he was my great uncle. My mother and John Reed set up a charity in honour of his name in 1995 called the John Bradburne Memorial Society. We raised money in honour of John's name for the people he looked after until his death in 1979.
Okay, so the John Bradburne Memorial Society is there to promote John and his memory.
Mm-hmm.
What is there to remember about John?
So John, in 1969, he came across Matemwa in Zimbabwe, which was a leprosy settlement at the time, where he came across hundreds of leprosy patients with bags over their heads. His friend took him there, and he said to his friend, "I can't leave here." And he stayed there. He had no medical training, nothing like that. And he felt that was where he needed to be. He stayed there and he cared and he loved the patients, caring for their wounds, the best way he knew how, until he was murdered in 1979.
So John died in Africa, but his birth and upbringing was very much in England. In fact, not very far from here.
Absolutely, yeah, in Skerworth, yeah.
So I think he went to school in Holt, was it?
Yeah.
Not very far, which is about half an hour's drive, if that, 5 or 6 miles away from here. So he's very much an Englishman who ended up in Africa.
Yeah.
Ended up very far from his home, very far from his where he had brought up and how he was brought up, living in a colony with people suffering from leprosy in the middle of Africa. You grew up with your mother was his niece. His niece.
Yeah.
She must have had some very interesting things to say about John.
She grew up with him, but she was very private. Well, she talked a bit about him. My granny was obviously his sister, and they were very close growing up. They had a very strong, there were 5 of them, 5 children. John was the third, and my granny was the second born, and they were a very close family. My mum talked about him. Obviously, she set up the charity, and so as children, my sisters and I growing up, we knew a bit about him, but actually it wasn't until I went to Matemwa when I was 18 that I really saw the devotion and actually what he did when he was out there, giving up every comfort, a bed to lie on, a chair, clothes. He had nothing, and he gave it all up to be with the patients and care for them.
Now, the John Bradburne Memorial Society was founded in which year, remember?
1995.
So, and it has done an awful lot to promote John in terms of just people starting to understand his story.
Sure.
But would it be fair to say that his story is still not that well known, even in England?
Yeah. I mean, it's something that I particularly am keen to get his story, his story of his life and the sacrifice he gave for his patients. The story of his poetry. There's an enormous amount of books by Professor David Crystal. He's written countless books on John's poetry. It was one thing he loved to do when he was in England, but solely in Africa. And he's one of the most prolific poets in England, and he's in the Guinness World Book of Records for it.
He is a poet, and his life, even on a sort of humanitarian level, is of great interest and very heroic. But there's another side to John as well, which is that I think it was last year that he was declared a servant of God by the church. So there's a whole spiritual dimension of John. Does the John Bradburne Memorial Society get involved in that? I mean, do you have people writing to you talking about maybe they've prayed to John or asked John to help them spiritually?
Absolutely. So we have 2 objectives really. So we have the objective of maintaining John's memory in helping. We send money out to Matemwa if they need food, medication, buildings. We have that side, but we also have the promotion of John as a person and his spirituality, and with that we're going through the whole cause of beatification, which we'll probably go into later, and Yeah, that's paramount. They run side by side, really, because without John's spirituality, the other stuff wouldn't happen.
Now, interestingly, you're not actually a Catholic, are you?
No, I'm not. I'm an Anglican.
So what do you make of John's kind of extreme living of the gospel?
Well, not something I know personally, but my mum converted to Catholicism, and so I was very aware of the rosary and, you know, the prayers and how important that is.
Can you give me an example of somebody who's written to you about John?
I have countless emails, letters, most days, of people. The biggest one, so we launched this cause for beatification. A part of that is people, you have to collect all the testimonies, and I have files and files and files of them. There's one particular incident of a man in Glasgow, Mr. Hamilton, who had a brain tumour, and he was dying in hospital, and the doctors basically said to his wife, you know, there's no hope, we can't do it. He was a Catholic, and he and his wife, they started praying through John's intercession, and he was healed, and he lived, and it was a proven medical miracle. The doctors couldn't explain how suddenly a man dying of a brain tumour suddenly was cured instantaneously and lived for years after that.
And this is all documented? Absolutely,
and there's medical evidence, amazing. But I get regular people's testimonies, intercessions where people have prayed through John, asking for help, be it, you know, financial issues, health issues, whatever issues we'll have. I've done it myself. I know I'm not Catholic, but I've prayed through his novena, and absolutely, he's definitely helped me. Absolutely, I can say that.
That's incredible. So you actually ask, he's an intercessor for you?
Absolutely, yeah.
That's wonderful. So the message of John, you're involved in propagating the message of John, but how closely do you work with, say, I mean, who is the promulgator of the cause at the moment? Is it in Rome, or where do they?
So it's in Rome. So we have a postulator, Dr. Enrico Solinas, who my mother, before she died, found. They've been looking for years to try and find a postulator, and for some reason, the whole process of beatification is quite difficult to find postulators, especially in the UK.
Yes.
So Mum found Enrico, and she wrote to him, and he wrote back, and he said he knew about John, and he wanted to take the cause on.
So is he like a priest in the Vatican?
No,
or?
He's an ecclesiastical lawyer.
So that's what you need. You need a canon lawyer to get somebody.
Yeah.
So is he the person then who is collating all the information on John
he
and any
is
miracles?
The postulator. So we have, as part of the cause process, we have the historical commission where Didier Rance is working alongside other people.
He's the author
of this book, to collect all the information, the historical evidence.
And he's French, right?
He's French. And then we've got David Crystal, Professor David Crystal, who writes lots of books on John's poetry. He's collected all of the archives together. There's a poetry website with all of John's poetry on there. There's Audible, you can hear John speaking the poetry. So he's a part of it. So there are lots of different facets of and Enrico has to pull it all together in this enormous document to put to the Vatican.
So John is very much an international figure, not just between England and Africa, but also people on the continent then seemingly are starting to get interested in him.
Yeah.
Do you get letters and emails from people across the globe interested in John?
All the time, yeah.
Which countries?
Philippines, France, Spain, America we started to get more from now. Worldwide, I would say. I mean, John is very well known in Zimbabwe. You know, not many people don't know him over there. When we had the launch of the cause, 15,000 people turned up.
Really?
Now the postulator said never, for the start of a cause, you would never find that in Italy.
Wow.
But it just shows the devotion that there is over there.
Have you been to Africa?
Yeah, so when I was 18, I went and lived at Matemwa and the orphanage next door for about 3 to 4 months.
What was that like?
Amazing. Transformative for me. It's an 18-year-old girl leaving school and going to this world where, you know, and I wanted that gap year experience to go and see how the other people live on the other side of the world, you know, with very little, and it was very humbling. And actually, they are amazingly generous with their, you know, they'd give you everything off the back of them, and food. They were so generous, and they'd give you everything. Wonderful.
Presumably, you went there because of the family connection with John.
Yeah, I knew I wanted to do something that was going to make my gap year, you know. And so working in the orphanage and being at the leprosy settlement was, an experience. Yeah, amazing experience.
So did you actually meet people that were living at Matamba that knew John?
Yeah. So there are still, to this day, there are 4 patients who were around when John was still alive. And so we've collected, obviously, their testimonies for the cause and the absolute love they talk about John. And, you know, it's very emotional for them. What he did for them, he was the first person who actually showed them that they weren't just cast aside, you know, human beings of society, and that they mattered. And he made them feel loved. When they had been sent to this place with bags over their heads, you know, numbers around their neck, you know, it was just...
But there's something as well, though, in John's story, which is very touching, because John... I mean, the people who were at the colony, they are rejected by society in a sense. They are outcasts in a way. But in many respects, John's life, certainly in England, was one of rejection and
absolutely
not really fitting in anywhere across England and then into Europe. And yet, when he met these people living in these abject poverty, and it was almost like a jigsaw that they and he fitted together. You know,
he felt they were his people. He felt that. He belonged.
When you were there, did you get a sense of that?
Yeah, absolutely. He was one of them, regardless if he had leprosy or not. He was a Zimbabwean, just like they were. You know, he was one of their community, and it didn't matter of the colour of his skin or what, you know, the way he spoke and didn't speak Shona or whatever. He fitted. That was his people. Yeah.
There's something a bit mysterious about John's life. Would you agree?
Yeah. There is. I mean, not many people could have lived, I mean, for certainly, streets of London, choosing to sleep on the street and be a sort of a nomad is something I know a lot of people do find themselves lost in their lives. And I do think that his whole life was searching until he found Matamba.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So your job is to make him better known.
Absolutely.
And how do you go about that? I mean, where do you start?
So we've got a website that we promote our work. We sell books. We put on. So, for instance, we needed to fundraise for some water tanks. They've had very little water
at Matamba.
So actually, Teresa did the last one, and Teresa's my. What is she? My cousin. Okay. And
so it's a family effort. So John's
absolutely.
Extended family are involved in the John Bradburne Memorial Society. That's kind of sort of endearing.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting because it reminds people that saints, at whatever stage, were flesh and blood.
Absolutely.
They had brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers. Absolutely. Some of them had children. So it's really interesting, you know, that John's blood still is with you and with others that are promoting his cause. But sorry, you were saying you're raising money for...
So we put on various fundraisers. So Teresa's just done a paddle down. We couldn't do the Thames because of coronavirus, but she did a paddle down her River Stour, and we raised an amazing amount of money to be able to buy the water tanks that now, when the rains are coming, that we'll be able to fill up and they'll be able to have constant water supply. Things like that you and I take for granted, you know, water, electricity. It's, Do
you find that people who are coming to John's story for the first time, in England in particular, are very receptive? Do they get him?
No, a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't get him, but they're intrigued by the story and the figure, because he was rather strange, you know.
He's eccentric.
Well, that's it.
But
that makes him interesting.
There's an aspect of the Englishness, which there, you know, a long tradition of English eccentrics, and maybe John
Yeah.
You know, in a very good sense. But there's also a long tradition of English mystics. I mean, we're not very far from Norwich here, where we have Julian of Norwich, and obviously Marjorie Kemp also operated in this area in East Anglia. And there's a long tradition of that sort of English mysticism, and it's often combined with that eccentricity a little. And John seems, to my eyes, to be very much part of that tradition.
Yeah,
you know, there's nothing unusual from that. But I agree with you, in a 21st century context here in the United Kingdom, I just wonder how John's story resonates with your average Briton who may or may not be religious, may not be that interested.
So, well, I'm not a Catholic, as we've established, but I wouldn't say I'm a devout Anglican, but actually what resonates to people is people doing extraordinary things for the sake of others, you know, be it giving up your life to you know, he refused to leave the patients, and that's why they shot him, and that's what it's about. It's not necessarily, yes, the spiritual side was absolutely paramount to John's life. That was why he found Matemwa and stayed there. It was from God, you know, he really felt that. But for me and for other people who maybe not believe in the religious side, it's about a person doing an amazing thing, caring for other people, that not many of us could do.
But I guess, Kate, I would also suggest that it was more than just doing things for people, you know, because there are very many good-hearted people who do things, but John's motivation was singularly Christian, particularly Catholic, in that he saw in each of these patients at Matumba the image of Christ, and that's what he was attracted to. And they saw in him as the care healer of the image of Christ as well. So I think because the other thing was that his death, his tragic death, martyrdom indeed, fits with that pattern of within the Christian understanding of a total self-giving, which most humanitarian enterprises at a certain point will say, well, that's enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whereas in the Christian and John, it was never enough. Would you agree?
He kept going. Yeah.
Now, what is the situation with Zimbabwe today? I mean, you said that there was 15,000 people turned up. Is John a very well-known figure?
He is very well-known. He's
amongst all sections of the community?
I would say predominantly Catholic. However, people at Matemwa are not solely Catholic, so the patients there, you know, there are still leprosy patients, but we also have handicapped people and people with mental illnesses and things. And actually, people, they have all different, you know, religions, but he is revered there. He really is. And my job with the society is to promote him, not just in Zimbabwe. The cause has started in Zimbabwe because that's where John spent the last part of his life. But my job is to promote him worldwide and get his story known.
Do you have much contact with the bishops then in Zimbabwe?
So there was a conference, and all the bishops of Zimbabwe all agreed to promote the cause and start the cause of John's canonization. Because
it must be, I mean, John died in the Zimbabwean war in the end of the 70s, which was a particularly nasty, particularly vicious war. And John is a European living in Africa. Have you found that he's accepted by the current everybody in Zimbabwe, in the sense that he's not seen as an outsider who was coming to Africa? You know, sort of.
I think at the time he was definitely seen as a threat. You know, he was deemed as a threat, and people tried to oust him.
Sure.
But he was not going to. But now, regardless of that, his colour of his skin. No, that it doesn't matter. What he did was enough for people to.
So whatever the political shade in Zimbabwe, people recognise John for what he was trying to do.
Absolutely.
That's incredible. Yeah. It must have been amazing for you as a young woman to go to where John lived and ultimately died. Do you have any particular memory there that you hold dear? I
remember last year going to see the place where he was shot and dragged across the road, and I was with 3 other people, and it was quite emotional, and just imagining, reliving what the fear I would have had, knowing that you were going to be, and he knew that he was going to be killed. But yeah, it was emotional. That was an emotional thing to witness what they did, and it was hard. But I don't feel, it was what it was, and this happened.
Yeah, I mean, John's death, for anybody who doesn't know, I mean, he was abducted from where he was living. And then there was quite a period before he was, I mean, his end, he was ultimately shot, but there was a period where there was all sorts of humiliations and not knowing what was happening, which must have been the most terrifying aspect of the whole process. I mean, to be abducted and then to be at the mercy of people who were obviously had no good intent. No. And yet what we have in terms of testimonies about that is John's great sense of peace.
Absolutely.
And how he radiated that, and even how he was praying through that
through the whole time,
period before his martyrdom. And then, of course, there's the reports of what happened afterwards. With this guy and stuff. Would you like to say a little bit about that?
Well, apparently when they shot him and they dragged his body, which is where I got emotional, there were lights that were seen when they were trying to hide his body, and there were lights, and they thought someone was coming, so they hid away. And there was a bird that lowered down above his body, and I don't know, things like that don't often happen,
No.
And there have been countless things that people have witnessed, especially out in Zimbabwe.
Really?
The sun spinning at certain times, eagles flying, bees swarming. There are lots of signs that people affiliate with John, and I really believe in that. Actually, I really see that that's a sign. Yeah.
Of course, the bee is associated with John. Do you want to tell us a little bit why that is?
Yeah. So he, before he got to Matamwa, he stayed at Silvera House, and which is a Jesuit
mission house, I guess, in then Salisbury, which was the capital of Zimbabwe, Rhodesia as it was.
Yeah, and in his room, he was writing on his typewriter, various poetry bits, still trying to suss out what he needed to do. And there was a nest of bees in his room. They never stung him. They warded off people from him so he could stay in his room, write his poetry, and amazingly, this swarm of bees never stung him, never ever touched him. And so since that day, people have always associated bees. At Matamwa, there are hundreds of hives, and they make honey there and sell the honey, and it's special. So every time I see a bee, I always say, "Oh, hello, John."
It's very nice because in the Catholic Church, statues of saints often have little indicators. You probably know that. And to think that the bee could be a symbol of John is very touching because it's so natural and normal.
Yeah.
And I guess bees in Africa are a bit different from bees in England.
They're big.
Yeah,
they're very
probably
big.
Much more dangerous as well. So where do you go from here? What is there? I mean, do you contact? How many members are there, for example?
So roughly around 5,000, but we're growing all the time.
And you send out newsletters?
So we send out a newsletter twice a year, in the summer and the winter, and we promote stuff on social media, on our Facebook group, on Instagram, on our website, and. Yeah, that's how we're trying to get. And then I have various people who go and do. Didier does talks in France. David Crystal does talks over here for people. I've got various people who do that. And really, and then we've got the whole cause process that we're trying to manage as well.
So if anybody runs a group of whatever description and wants to have somebody come and talk, they can contact
absolutely.
you, and you can. That's what you do. You provide the context for that. Do you have any larger projects that you dream of, Kate, to get John better known?
I do. So since I took it over in 2018 when my mum died, my initial thing after rereading the book actually was it just jumped out that John's life would make an amazing film,
wouldn't it?
And I have this thing in my gut. So for me, that's what I want to do to promote John. But obviously that's down to funding and production companies and things. So it's going to be a long process, but I'm sure we'll get there.
Yeah, because his life is epic.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and I'm not just talking about the end and the martyrdom, but it's an epic journey of a soul, isn't it? I mean, it's a soul which is searching for truth and for peace, and he finds it in the most unlikely place, and then he sacrifices himself for the people there, and there's something sort of not just epic, but almost sort of elemental about that.
Yeah.
So I would encourage anybody who doesn't know John Bradburne to read his story. I'm sure you would too,
absolutely.
because it's an amazing, an unusual story. There's nothing quite like it.
Yeah.
I agree with you. It would make a superb film if done properly. So that's what the John Bradburne Memorial Society would love to do.
Love to do that. But obviously we have projects. The key thing for us is for caring for our patients at Matemwa. And
so you promote John, but you also have this link with Matemba where John lived.
So the patients that we have there are
how many
36 of them
36.
now.
And they're still suffering all from leprosy?
No, not all from leprosy, from various things, mental health issues, disabilities, you know. But we fund food, medication, building work that need doing, all that sort of thing. So long term, we want to build a community centre, revamp the clinic that's there for the patients at the moment, and just make the living accommodation as best as it can be for the patients.
So the John Bradburne Memorial Society is not just a kind of historical research society on the life of John. It's actually got a living link with John's own life and his mission, and with the people who he served and loved in Africa. And it's very much linked to that. So when people donate money to you, it's donating to the memory of John and promoting that, but it's also presumably helping a very worthy cause.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, Kate, it's been absolutely fascinating discussing your ancestor, John Bradburne, an Englishman with an extraordinary history. But I think that we're only at the start of another adventure. Wouldn't you agree with John?
I agree, yeah.
So how can people find out more about John?
So we've got our website, www.johnbradburne.com, where you find all the information about what we do. John's a brief story about John, a selection of books and things, that promotion materials that we do. So go on there, and anybody wants any information, my email address is info@johnbradburne.com.
And presumably people can find prayers and novenas.
Absolutely,
there to John.
and I send things out. I can post things to people all over the world. And
obviously if anybody has a miracle through John's intercession,
get in touch, please.
So you're actually encouraging people to contact you for these materials.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, Kate, this is your first trip to Walsingham. I hope it's not your last.
No, thank you.
I know John had a great devotion to Our Lady, and we ask Our Lady of Walsingham to help you in your work promoting this exceptional Englishman who deserves to be better known.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.